You want to drive?
I've never done
I'll walk you through it.
Okay, I'll do. Yeah.
All right. All right. So I'll just I'll start with, it's a lot more manual than these two roasters. You do have to pay attention to the heat. You do have to pay attention to the airflow. The heat source is just the propane infrared burner, and that basically heats up underneath. It gets the drum hot, and when the beans are in there and they're tumbling, there's these fins that will agitate the beans. This is very conductive, so the heat is going to transfer from the drum to the beans, and then as the beans tumble, they're going to transfer heat to each other. But the other nice thing about this is that there is airflow going through the drum, so there is also some convective heating. We're going to start off where the drying phase is going to be almost all conduction, and later in the phase we're going to move to more of a convective, so we're going to use more airflow. That's going to help remove chaff out. It's also going to help do like a more even roast also. So right now I've preheated the drum. It's been running the entire time. You're going to need this.
Yeah. Which one?
I usually put it on my left because it's easier to pour the beans in.
Yeah, that'll work.
So this is the exhaust. It's really hot, so if you guys are over here, be careful not to touch it. So I would say let's bump this heat up to 2.25 kPa.
This is the heat? Or
This is the heat right here.
Okay.
So we're going to move this to just 2.25 kPa.
So, oh, so you're opening a valve.
Right.
Yep.
Let's go ahead and the airflow's fine. Let's go ahead and take this off so you've got the glove.
So I'm going to take this off how?
Just lift it up, and then you can just set it.
On something metal, right?
Yeah.
Can I just, maybe I can pour and then just keep holding it?
Okay. You gotta wait for, the other thing we're gonna wait for right now is the drum has been staying at roughly 360 Fahrenheit. So we're actually gonna wait for the bean temperature to rise up to about 420 Fahrenheit. Once it gets there, then we're gonna charge the roaster, and then you're gonna reassemble. You're gonna put the exhaust tube back on, take this off. Make sense so far?
Yeah.
So it's kind of like a still where you have like your excess drain off. So like with the still, you're burning off the fluids, you're burning off the water vapor, and then never mind, I'll shut up.
So we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna start here, which is basically telling Artisan to start recording all the events that are gonna happen during this roast. And once we see this get to about, I would say about 410, 415, we'll charge.
That's the chamber temperature.
Right. So there's there's actually 3 thermocouples in this. I pay attention to 2. I pay attention to bean temperature and environment temperature. Environment it's the temperature that is in the drum.
Yep.
And once we charge it with beans, the environment temperature is going to read higher than the bean temperature. The bean temperature, it's a thermocouple that sits in the mass of the beans, so it's basically the surface of the beans. So okay, go ahead and
pour this in right here, right?
Yep.
And how much do we just pour in?
This is a pound, and I'm going to tilt it because it'll help.
And you can see down here the heating
All right,
source.
go ahead and put that back on.
Okay. Okay.
So Artisan, I don't know how it is on your roaster, but you'll see that what's happening is the bean temperature, they're at room temperature right now, but the drum is so much hotter. So the thermocouples are dropping in temperature, the bean temperature is rising, and then we're going to get to an event called the turning point, and that's where the thermocouples match the bean temperature.
Yeah, so one's cooler and it's causing the other one to decrease in temperature.
Right.
Well, and
Because
then
you
the
have
bean
mass.
themselves are heating up, obviously, because the drum was preheated and it was hot. So they need to reach the same temperature. That's the ROR, right? That's where they...
ROR is the rate of rise.
Yeah.
So it's basically, you measure in like every 15-second intervals, every 30 seconds.
Yeah.
How quickly is the bean temperature rising? So in the beginning,
After it drops. So there's the initial drop, and then it starts to climb. That's the ROR, is the rate in which it's climbing.
right, after turning point. So once everything stabilizes and matches, then you can start measuring ROR. So, and I actually have that configured here. You can see these, well actually it doesn't look like they're working right now, but you'll see those numbers changing. You'll have one that is for the rate of rise of the environment temperature, and then rate of rise for the bean temperature. So it looks like,
for the record, this software is way better than what they have there. Like, I only have one sensor there that's just checking the exhaust temperature. He has a temperature sensor for both the inside of the chamber where the beans are, and for exhaust, and for intake, right?
so it's the external, like the outside of the drum I have a measurement for, and then I have a measurement for the inside of the drum, and then the probe that makes contact with the beans.
Yep.
And did you do the probe work yourself, or?
I did not.
That's a part of Huky.
Yeah, I actually, you can, but when I ordered this, so the history behind the Huky is it's a guy in Taiwan that retired. He was a factory worker, and this is what he does.
Here. We did hit the spot where the drop is now climbing with the beans, right?
Yep.
Just reach the same,
Yeah.
the same temperature.
Yeah.
I
That's
would
what you
actually
want.
bump the heat up to about 2.5 kPa. So turn. Yeah, there you go. All right, that's good.
Yep.
So the history behind the Huky is it's Mr. Lee, I think is what they call him. He makes these individually, one by one, and each one that you order is got a serial number on it. Last I checked, he was up in like the 1200 range, and I ordered mine when he was on 604. So when I ordered this one, I asked for these thermocouples in here. By default, he gives you this bean temperature, and then normally there would be a gauge here, but I asked for a thermocouple so I could hook it up to Artisan.
Yeah, Artisan, by the way, is an open source bean roasting software that's very widely supported. Supports a lot of sensors, and it gives you a lot of data, right? So it's like creating a roaster that supports Artisan is desirable, right? Like it's.
So what we're doing, Josh, is I'm watching as we go. Every so often, I'm asking Josh to bump the heat. I'm starting off with a moderate heat, and as we get closer to first crack, we're bumping the heat up. So we're at a stage where I would actually bump the heat again to 2.75, and then we're going to hold it here.
Right here.
Yep. We're getting really close to the end of drying, which is around 300 Fahrenheit. 300 to 320 Fahrenheit is what people say.
What's this blue? The blue and the orange.
This is your rate of rise. So the blue is the rate of rise for the bean temperature. This orange is the rate of rise for the environment temperature. I primarily watch the bean temperature on the rate of rise, but I actually drive with the environment temperature. So I get the environment temperature about 10 to 20, anywhere between 10 to 20 degrees higher than I want to drop. And then what's going to happen is the bean temperature is just going to follow the environment temperature. So we'll get to a point where we'll hold the environment temperature at about 420 and slow that down. So we're going to take away heat, and we're going to stretch out that roast after first crack.
Which is what you could do with that B-more or the profiles on this, but you can't in the middle of a roast decide on the San Fresco. We want to stretch this. You have to pre-program that curve, right?
Yeah, we're going to bump it up more. And there's a lot of different beliefs about how long you keep the beans in certain ranges of temperature. You know, there's theory behind drying the beans for a longer time. So below 300 Fahrenheit, you're going to spend 5 minutes. Some people say that's too much. Some people say it's not enough. You know, it just varies. Then there's a lot of science behind once you're at the end of drying and before you hit first crack, you can shorten it and you can accentuate origin flavors, so fruit, sweetness, florals. If you stretch it, you're going to get more body, so it's going to be thicker on the tongue. You might get more chocolates, you might get more caramel flavors. There's a lot of different ways that people go about doing it.
What is this mark right here? So I see it.
That did it automatically. It's standard drying.
So
I have it set.
new.
Yeah, I have it set every time. I just, for consistency, 300 Fahrenheit, dry end. Some people might set it to 320 or 310, but...
So the software put that. It wasn't that it read something. Well, it read 300 and said that's the end of running.
Right. Now, when we get closer to first crack, we'll mark that manually, which there's buttons here. So I'll wait for it to roll, and then I'll mark first crack, and then I'll wait for the first crack to end, and then I'll mark the end of that. We actually probably need more heat.
It's also the temperature in which you do things, roast at, will also affect it too. Like if you, like the sensor I have on that one, if I'm in a cold day or a windy area or I don't have the fluid on, it'll actually read a little, it'll be affected by the winds that are blowing by and stuff. So it might make it heat up more than it would normally if I was in a space that didn't have any moving air.
Or if the sensor was in a different location.
So Josh, we are getting closer to first crack. So what we're going to do is we're going to bump the heat down to 1.5. And what we're doing is we're slowing down the heat because we don't want to charge in the first crack with all this heat, because what's going to happen is the beans are going to start to heat up themselves, and then it's going to drive the roast really high really quickly. But like Josh was saying in his talk earlier, if you stretch it out, you can accentuate other flavors. So I like to stretch it out at least 2 minutes roughly. From the time first crack hits to the time that I drop. And usually first crack on this machine will last for about 1.5 minutes, depending on the bean. And first crack is about to hit.
So we heard the outlier, right? So I just hear it again.
So that's first crack started. So we're actually going to bump the airflow just a little bit. And what that's going to help do is remove the smoke and push it outside. It's also going to help with getting the chaff, also known as silver skin, that's stuck to the beans. Once you have that reaction, the beans are going to expand really rapidly and you get that separation. So that chaff in here, it would just sit. If I didn't have the airflow, it would sit in the drum and just bake with the beans. So I want to suck that out into this seat here where the chaff can collect.
You can hear really good too. Yeah. Some machines it's hard to hear first crack. That one's a little harder. That one you can't hear second crack as much, but you can kind of hear it. This one, the material on the outside of the machine makes it really easy to hear that.
There's no sound deadener.
Yeah, and that's what most people go off of. I think that most people are going off of the sound to figure out when roast levels are at the level they like. They're not going off of visual as much or off of smell, because it's just kind of rudimentary. So sound, you can get a pretty good idea, like, yeah, that's happening right now.
How dark do you want to go?
Let's do a medium.
Okay.
I was curious about the little thing you have going from thermocouples to your computer. Is that something that the microcontroller there, was that provided with the machine, or did you buy that separately?
No, that was a separate.
So you've got separate software and separate machine and separate microcontroller that you've all tied together.
Yeah, and I can actually point out what's mine and what comes with the roaster.
First crack end, right?
Yep.
So we heard like the first crack trail off.
So I'm going to kill the heat right now, because what's going on in the drum is there's already the drum itself is hot.
Yeah.
And I don't want to like just cook it really fast. So what we're going to do is we're going to let it coast, and then once it gets maybe 3 or 4 more degrees, we'll drop the beans out. But so if you order one of these, you get the stove as an option, you get the roaster, the exhaust, and he has a different exhaust system now. You get one of these fans, one of these seats, and one of these funnels. This was extra, and the fan was extra, because I didn't want to mess around with this when it's cooling. I just wanted to take the beans out, cool it, and then I could prepare for my next roast. This fidget it's just a device by a company called Fidget where you can hook up thermocouples to it. Actually, we should probably drop.
So how do I drop?
So hold it here, and then lift that up. Yep. Oh wow. And then put on the fan over here, and then there's the on switch. There you go.
So that's sucking down or blowing up?
It sucks down through the beans.
And they are hot right now. So we did the same thing on our roast. He cut the power. So that's when after I hit first crack on that, and it was rolling, I moved the temperature, the P1, I went down to I went from P5, which is 12 speed, down to P1, until right before I wanted to end and started heating up again. This is going to give it the last little boost. But.
Another thing is this is not standard with the Huky. It's something that if you follow the Huky guys, they buy that in addition. Mr. Lee, his design is to use this dampener for controlling airflow. But this is less accurate than saying I only want to supply X amount of voltage. So unless you were to mark this, you may not always leave it in the same spot. And you're not going to have the fine-grained control of airflow with this.
So talk about what this software did here too.
So Artisan is some open source roast logging software. It will plot and build graphs based on usually bean temperature and environment temperature. Those are probably the most common. Some people just do bean temperature, nothing else. What we saw here, I don't know if you guys can see, but we brought the drum temperature up to 410 Fahrenheit roughly, and then we dropped the beans in. That's going to bring the temperature of the thermocouples in here down. And actually what happened was the bean temperature was rising up to match what's in the drum, and they equalized about right here, which is called the turning point. Once we got to the turning point, that's when the roast actually starts to begin. And we take that to dry end. Basically, you're removing as much moisture from the coffee as you can or want. Some people don't want to remove too much moisture. Some people want to remove all moisture. And then from dry end, we're getting into the Maillard reaction. And from dry end to first crack is when the beans start to brown. As soon as you get to first crack, they say it's drinkable. So, and then from first crack, you can see that the software told me how much development I have. There's this yellow.
That was
it's kind of highlighted.
That's kind of like the perfect area.
Yeah, you can see where
desirable.
we lowered the temperature too. Like we cut off right there.
And there's really no perfect, there's no perfect roast profile. There's no perfect amount of development. It really depends on what you like. Some people like
your taste buds.
What's that?
Your taste buds.
Your taste buds, and then also how you're brewing it. Josh was talking about pour over versus espresso. Espresso, if you were to pull shots of a really light roasted coffee, it's going to be so bitter, sour, really tart. Some people may like it, some I don't like it. I like the more subtle acidity in my espresso, but I do like that fruit flavor. But what I'll do for espresso is I'll stretch this out. Like the longer it sits in the roaster, you're going to mute that acidity, but you're also going to introduce the carbon flavors, the chocolatey tones, the caramel-like tones. You're just going to get a different characteristic out of the coffee. But you can roast the same exact coffee 2 different ways, and they'll taste completely different, depending on how dark and how you develop the coffee.
That's where it comes in handy, keeping like a journal.
Yeah.
Because what I'll do is I'll roast a lot of coffee for friends and stuff. I send it to them, and then I wrote a code on the bag. It's like, this is how I roasted it. And then later on, they're like, dude, that coffee was great. I was like, what's the code? Because then I'll go back and I'll write down like, okay, this is what worked. But it's actually really in the eye of the beholder too, because like he may like, the flavors of a really dark, kind of a stretching out that second crack, but I may not like it, or someone else may not. So it's really just depending on that person.
And you can see the chaff collected here.
We got a lot of chaff in that one because there was a lot more coffee. So let's do 2 things real quick. I can either talk about the last part of this, I can do the talk where I talk about the do-it-yourself methods and hacking, or we can do another roast now and do that later. So let's bag up the coffee that we roasted. So you guys did this one right here, right? Okay. So I have some bags and I want to mark down notes on it. So let me grab this.